Okay, so let's look at a basic introduction to telecommunications. So in the module, we'll be looking in some detail at things like error coding, compression methods, and Wi-Fi networks. But really this lecture is to give a basic context as to some of the challenges that we actually face inside our communications infrastructure. So some of the basic concepts that we have is that telecommunications is really where we have a sender and the receiver and a channel in between, and we have some information flow between them. Okay, so we get the basic idea of a transmitter and a receiver, and then our transmission medium provides us with a channel. So it could be one or more channels. We don't have to use one single channel for sending from one place to the next. And then within our channels vary in the latency. That's the amount of time it takes to be able to send the data. So the fastest that we can send it will be at the speed of light. So even with the speed of light, it might take, it will obviously take some time to be able to get from the sender to the receiver. And we have delays inside our system, inside all the network components will actually delay things. We also look at the bandwidth of the channel, and that's the capacity of the channel to be able to accept data. And then obviously increasingly there's the security, and that's our ability to secure the channel. We can also have a point-to-point communication. We can go from one place to one other place, or we can have what's called a broadcast. So we can send our signals out to many different places at the same time. Okay, so that's a few basic principles. So, but what we have within our communication infrastructure is we have lots of different types of networks. Some of them are old legacy networks, other ones are fairly new, and other ones are rapidly changing. We also get local networks such as our Wi-Fi networks. And each of the networks themselves are interconnected by a whole lot of different communication cables and methods. So we've got radio links, we get copper cables, fiber optic links, and even things like satellite and radio links, along with our radio links. On the other hand, we have devices that give us pure data, so it's fairly easy to connect into the network. But many of our other sources of information, such as speech, audio, video, come in the form of an analog signal. And to be able to convert that into something that a computer will be able to understand and to be able to route across a network, we often have to convert into a digital format. So we have some sort of analog to digital conversion, or ADC. And then on the other end, to take it back into our analog world, then we need a digital to analog converter. Okay, so we have different interfaces that we have into our network infrastructure, but generally we're looking at creating this large-scale digital network. So there's different media, there's different transmission rates, there's different types of signals, and there's also different types of addressing. We might use an IP address for one way to be able to go from one place to the next, or we could use a telephone number, or there are also different addressing types of schemes. Along with this, we have what's called a quality service. Each of the different media types have a different requirement for what's really required for the communication channel. Some require fast communication speeds and guaranteed ones. Other ones just require that there is a fairly low delay in actually propagating the data. And what we have is really an increasing demand for both data and also for capacity. The growth of the internet has really generated a whole lot of new traffic, and we become more and more dependent upon the internet and the cloud every single day. 12 terabytes of tweets are sent every day. 90% of all the data that we've produced in the cloud was just produced in the last 2 years, And we're probably just on the cusp of a massive increase in the amount of data that we create, we propagate, and also that we consume. And like it or not, most of our industries are moving towards some sort of digital infrastructure. Banking has been transformed. Oil and gas couldn't really work without some sort of communication infrastructure. E-commerce too, more and more is going online, and things like transport are now highly dependent upon our communications infrastructure. And it's all gone digital. So for the networks that we created, we typically created different types of networks for different types of signals, of information. But now we're all fusing into a single format, and it's really taking data, voice, video, sensors and so on, and fusing it into our networks, which were really created for data. The amount of data that we create every day is increasing massively. So roughly 2.5 quintillion bytes are produced every single day. That's about 1 billion hard disks. The telecoms industry too is worth about 3% of the gross world product, about $4.7 trillion. And we become more and more dependent upon the infrastructure that it actually creates. And all along with that, we're also looking at creating an always-on infrastructure. We want the network to be there all the time, and it's always available. So we're continually using it. We're continually making sure that the network is still there. And by 2020, we'll have a whole lot of new devices which are connecting to the internet, such as 20 million Internet of Things devices connecting into the home, into control systems and so on. So the amount of devices that we have every day, the amount of devices connecting to the internet are increasing every single day. And what we have is that we have lots of different communication speeds for our connections. So we can go right from the lowest level, which is basic RS-232, which is a typical rate is about 9,600 bits per second. And then that can then go up through our Bluetooth. So Bluetooth will give us around 10, 20 megabits per second, up into Wi-Fi, which gives us about 54 megabits per second. Our satellite communications might be running about 200 megabits per second, up to Ethernet, which can go from 100 to 1 gigabit per second. That's 1 billion. And up to 10 gigabits per second. Our point-to-point links give us about 200 megabits per second too, but we can go right up to fibre optic cables, which can go over 40 gigabits per second. Okay, so we can have lots of different ways that we communicate and lots of different media there, and the media itself differs in its capacity. But we typically measure the capacity of our links, all the electronics and the cable and the transmitter and the antennas and so on, in terms of bits per second. And what we have just now is really what is called network convergence. It's really bringing together lots of different types of data and networks and different signals together into a communications infrastructure. We still have a while to go to be able to define a standard addressing format and standard protocols that could be used across, but there are different protocols used in each of the different methods which will at least provide a mechanism to be able to carry these signals across the network. But along with this network convergence is that we're really pushing lots of different types of data into our network, and we need to make sure that we have the right communications infrastructure. So some of the challenges that we have is to make sure that we get some sort of definition of latency, if it matters to us. What's the minimum delay? What's the maximum delay that we would encounter? And how can we guarantee that those limits apply. We also want to look at the bandwidth. Do we have the right capacity? Is it a guaranteed bandwidth? Will it vary over time? Increasingly, we also want to look at the security. Can someone have physical access to our communications? Could there be wiretaps? And what's the route taken? So if you have one station here, another one station there, and you don't want it to go through C, then you've got to make sure that your communication channel will route the data through an alternative route or a known route, and for you to validate that. There's also the robustness of the communication system. That's how it copes with failover. Are alternative links brought in terms of our communication? How does it cope with outages, and so on? Then obviously there's the cost. Are we paying per data that we send, or are we paying per hour or day? And then finally, we've got the access methods. How can we connect to it? What extra cost does it require to create the connections? And we typically classify our data into whether it requires a fast connection, low speed, fast setup and propagation, or whether it is sensitive to errors. So something like the control system for a nuclear power plant is obviously sensitive to both latency and also errors. We don't want really any errors. If we've sent a control signal, we need to make sure that it's received correctly. And we also want it to propagate quickly. If it's an alarm that's been triggered and we want to control something, we need to make sure that it's guaranteed to be able to get to the destination and for it to be correct. For voice, audio and video, as we'll see, we actually need low latency. We need to make sure that it doesn't take long to propagate, or we can drop the voice, audio and video, and we will significantly reduce the quality of the audio if it isn't consistently low propagation. But in terms of error, our eyes and our ears aren't actually that sensitive to little changes and little glitches, and we can smooth over things. So they're not, the channels that we produce aren't actually need to be that robust in terms of fixing errors or any errors that are caused. Computer data is probably the opposite to this. Computer data doesn't really matter that much about the latency. It tends to burst onto the network, and so the latency really doesn't matter that much. Obviously to the user it does, but what it is sensitive to is errors. Any errors will cause lots of problems in retransmission and so on. And then finally, something that's non-critical and probably has a robust way of checking for errors. Doesn't really matter that much on the latency or on the errors. So something like a fax transmission really is fairly robust. A few dots on the transmission received doesn't really matter that much. Okay, so that's our different types of service that we require. But what we have is an ever-increasing demand. 7.2 billion devices. There are more mobile phones, smartphones, than there are computers now in the world. We're seeing more and more devices connecting onto the internet, more and more sensors, more simpler devices, and we've also exhausted all our IP addresses for connecting onto the internet for computers. So in between, we typically have a communication service provider, such as BT, Virgin Media and so on, or it might come from a fixed public network such as the academic network in the UK, Janet. And then we'll also have our device providers. Cisco, Dell, Juniper Networks are providing the network infrastructure devices to be able to create the infrastructure. And then increasingly we have more and more services that are delivered digitally to our homes and to our devices. Digital TV, online games, e-commerce, and we have all our cloud providers, Amazon, Azure, Google, Facebook, and so on. So really we're increasing the amount of demand that we have, we're increasing the amount of devices that we have, so it's becoming more and more of a challenge to be able to cope with this infrastructure. And Along with this, we're becoming extremely dependent upon it. And really, if we lost it, then it would cause large-scale economic problems to any region of the world. Okay, so that was a basic pre-introduction to the module. We'll be covering things in more detail, and we'll be looking at things like errors and pulses, some Wi-Fi networks, and also to be able to look a little bit more in depth of what images are like, how they're processed, and how they're actually delivered to make some sort of sense